September 2nd, 2025, a boat moving through the Caribbean Sea disappeared in a flash of fire. A United States Navy drone had locked onto the vessel, and the strike was deliberate. The explosion killed 11 people on board. Within hours, President Trump released the footage to the public, making sure the world saw the moment it happened. Secretary of State Marco Rubio explained what had changed. This was no longer an interception. On the president's orders, they destroyed it. And then came the warning that echoed across the drug trade. Was this the beginning of a new war at sea? And how many more boats would go up in flames? Join us as we break down what happened after a U.S. Navy drone struck the $15 million drug cartel boat. For decades, the standard American response to a drug boat intercepted in the Caribbean or the Eastern Pacific was predictable. The Coast Guard cutters would pull alongside, then the enforcement would board, arrest the crews and seize the narcotics, after which the vessel would be detained. The whole operation would then be handed to federal prosecutors. It was a slow, resource-intensive, legally complicated process that produced conviction rates drug trafficking organizations had long since learned to price into their operating costs. Losing a boat and a crew was a cost of doing business. The organization absorbed it and sent the next boat. Operation Southern Spear ended that pattern. This operation began quietly in August 2025, when the Trump administration started deploying warships and military personnel to the Caribbean amid escalating pressure on Venezuela, whose government the U.S. had designated a narco-terrorist organization. The framing was specific and deliberate from the start. These were not just drug traffickers to be prosecuted, but to be destroyed. What followed over the next 5 months was unlike anything the United States had done in the waters of its own hemisphere since at least the Cold War. By February 23rd of 2026, American forces had conducted at least 44 strikes on 45 vessels, killing at least 151 people. 29 of those strikes were in the Eastern Pacific, 14 in the Caribbean, 2 in unspecified locations. The pace accelerated steadily through the fall and into winter, reaching a tempo by December that averaged a strike roughly every 4 days. On February 16th alone, U.S. forces conducted 3 lethal strikes in a single day in both the Pacific and the Caribbean, killing 11 people. One of the deadliest single days of the entire campaign. The weapon behind most of these strikes is the MQ-9 Reaper, and understanding what the Reaper costs explains one of the most uncomfortable facts about Operation Southern Spear. Defense One published a detailed cost analysis in December 2025 that put the economics of the campaign in terms that no administration statement had acknowledged. The vessels being destroyed, open-top motorboats with 4 outboard engines, the kind you can find for well under $100,000 on the used market, cost a fraction of the Hellfire missiles fired to destroy them. The crews aboard those boats were reportedly being paid approximately $500 per trip. Each drone used to kill them cost roughly 66,000 times as much as each crew member's single trip pay. Each missile cost between 80 and 300 times the crew member's pay. If American forces use 4 munitions per strike, twice to kill the crew and twice more to sink the vessel, the cost ratio reached between 320 and 12,000 times what the cartel paid for the same engagement. The USS Gerald R. Ford, America's most advanced aircraft carrier, was redirected to hunt speedboats in the Caribbean. The cost of operating that carrier for a single day exceeds the cost of every speedboat it was deployed to destroy. The broader force supporting Operation Southern Spear, 10 F-35B fighters at $109 million apiece, 7 Reaper drones at $33 million each, 3 P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft at $145 million each, at least 1 AC-130J gunship at $165 million, represented a total platform investment of at least $1.8 billion before a single hour of operating costs was counted. Against it, open-top motorboats carrying cocaine and crews earning $500 a run. Defense One described this as the awful arithmetic of modern American military operations, a problem the United States has faced in every conflict of the modern era, spending orders of magnitude more than its adversary on every exchange. The cartels do not need to win any individual engagement. They need to keep sending boats until the cost of the American response becomes politically or financially unsustainable. History in Vietnam and Afghanistan and Iraq suggests that this is a race the United States has struggled to win. The administration's answer to the cost criticism was to escalate the pressure on the organizations and governments supplying the boats, not just on the boats themselves. By late November, the Cartel of the Suns had been designated a foreign terrorist organization. On December 15th, Trump signed an executive order designating fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction. 2 days later, he threatened to designate the Maduro regime itself as a foreign terrorist organization. On December 24th, a CIA drone struck a marine facility on the Venezuelan coast that the U.S. identified as a loading dock for narco boats, the first acknowledged American strike on Venezuelan soil. No one was killed. The infrastructure was destroyed. Trump announced a blockade of sanctioned oil tankers. And on January 3, 2026, U.S. forces captured Nicolas Maduro in Caracas and flew him out of the country. At that point, what had begun as a counter-narcotics campaign had become something considerably larger. The legal framework the administration used to justify all of this generated immediate and sustained controversy. The Office of Legal Counsel produced a memo asserting that it was permissible for the United States to use lethal force against unflagged vessels carrying cocaine, on the theory that cartels use drug proceeds to fund violence, and that framing the strikes as specifically targeting the boat rather than the people aboard put the operation on its firmest legal ground. Legal experts outside the administration described that memo as fiercely criticized. Under international human rights law, multiple experts concluded it is unlawful to knowingly cause the death of individuals, even criminals, in order to destroy criminal assets like drugs. During congressional briefings, Pentagon officials reportedly acknowledged that they did not need to positively identify the specific individuals on a vessel as cartel members before striking it. The targeting decision was made based on intelligence that a vessel was operating along a known trafficking route and was linked to a designated organization. The human consequences of that targeting standard became impossible to avoid in November 2025. The Guardian reported that governments and families of those killed in the strikes said many of the dead were civilians, primarily fishermen operating in the same waters being monitored for trafficking. Civil rights attorneys filed a federal lawsuit in January 2026 on behalf of the families of 2 people from Las Cuevas, Trinidad and Tobago, killed in a strike on October 14th. Senator Rand Paul questioned the legal basis for the strikes on Meet the Press. The Senate passed a bipartisan amendment that would have restricted the administration's authority to continue the strikes without congressional authorization. The Republican-controlled Senate twice rejected resolutions to formally limit that authority. The House Armed Services Committee launched a bipartisan investigation. Hegseth insisted that the U.S. military knew exactly who it had killed in each strike and declined to make any evidence public. The strikes did not stop. December 22nd, a narco submarine struck in the Eastern Pacific. 1 person killed. December 30th, another vessel struck. 2 more dead. December 31st, another strike. February 16th, 3 strikes in a single day, 11 dead. What the operation demonstrated, regardless of the legal arguments and the cost debates, is what American surveillance technology can do to a trafficking route when the decision is made to apply it without the constraints of law enforcement procedure. The MQ-9 Reapers operating from Rafael Hernandez Airport in Puerto Rico flew persistent orbits over the trafficking corridors, connecting Venezuela and Colombia to Central America and Mexico. Their synthetic aperture radar sees wake patterns and hull signatures invisible to human observers. Their infrared sensors work in darkness and rain. They can stay on station for more than 20 hours at a stretch, and when they find a target, they carry up to 10 AGM-114 Hellfire missiles to engage it. The P-8A Poseidon aircraft working alongside them extended coverage across wider areas. Intelligence sharing arrangements with Colombia, Panama, Costa Rica, Trinidad and Tobago, and other regional partners added ground-level information that drones alone cannot collect. The Royal Air Force provided surveillance support. The network assembling the targeting picture was not just American, it was a coalition built around a shared interest in disrupting the supply chain connecting South American cocaine production to North American and European markets. Whether that infrastructure has actually been disrupted in ways that reduce the flow of drugs into the United States is the question the operation's critics keep returning to. Much of the fentanyl killing Americans does not travel by sea at all. It crosses the southern land border, synthesized by Mexican cartels from Chinese precursor chemicals, smuggled through ports of entry. Maritime interdiction has historically removed a portion of the supply but has never meaningfully reduced overall drug availability because trafficking organizations respond by finding alternative routes and alternative methods. Susie Wiles, Trump's White House chief of staff, offered the administration's strategic logic in terms that left no ambiguity about what the operation was ultimately designed to accomplish. Trump would keep blowing boats up until Maduro cried uncle. That framing made explicit what the strike pattern had been suggesting for months, that Operation Southern Spear was never solely about interdicting individual drug shipments. It was about using lethal force to impose costs on a government the administration considered a narco-terrorist enterprise, with the boats as both a tactical target and a political instrument. Maduro is now in American custody. Whether that outcome justifies the 151 people killed in the water to get there is a question that courts, Congress, and the American public are still working through. What the first 5 months of Operation Southern Spear proved beyond any reasonable dispute is that the United States can find, track, and destroy almost any vessel operating in the Caribbean or the Eastern Pacific that it decides to destroy. The technology is that good. The question of whether that capability, deployed at that cost against those targets under that legal theory, produced the outcome it was aimed at, that question does not have an answer yet. Wild chase off the coast. A high-speed boat loaded with $13 million in drugs meets a U.S. destroyer on patrol. The cartel crew thought they could slip by, but this warship had other plans. Radar locked on, engines roared, and tension shot through the waves as sailors braced for a showdown. What happens when a merchant of chaos faces a naval giant prepared to strike? Lives hang in the balance as orders fly and decisions become life or death. Will the smugglers find a way out, or is this their final run? Get ready for every twist and turn ahead. May 25th, 2025. Somewhere in the Caribbean, the sea lies calm under a blazing sun. It seems like any quiet morning. Then a Navy P-8 Poseidon overhead notices a lone vessel. No name, no flag, no AIS signal. Just a bare hull drifting through the funnel, a known smuggling route. That sight triggers instant concern, setting off alarms across the command chain as crews scramble to find out who's behind this ghostly ship. A tense race against time begins immediately. The guided missile destroyer USS Gravely is on alert. Sent from Norfolk under U.S. Northern Command's Maritime Homeland Defense Authority, mission is clear: intercept threats before they reach U.S. shores. Top priority, drug shipments. Each haul intercepted cuts cartel funds and curbs violence back home. On deck, Coast Guard Law Enforcement Detachment 401 stands ready. They're the ship's crime-fighting team, skilled in boarding tactics and primed to turn suspicious vessels into evidence. With encrypted comms and satellite eyes, every move is precise, ensuring Gravely stays one step ahead in keeping seas and communities safer. Timing and teamwork matter most out here. Just after 6 a.m., the USS Gravely spots an unidentified vessel on radar. No flag, no call sign, just dead silence. Attempts to communicate go unanswered. That silence raises alarms. Orders snap across the deck. Intercept immediately. Sailors spring into motion as RHIBs hit the waves, engines growling with purpose, slicing toward the mystery in the water. The leadette team loads M4 carbines, boarding gear, and body cams. From the bridge, officers watch every move: speed, waves, distance. One slip could spark a life-or-death standoff. Strangely, the smuggler boat doesn't bolt. It just bobs like an empty shell. Maybe the crew thinks they can bluff their way through. Maybe they misjudge who's closing in. But when a Navy destroyer locks on, bluffing rarely works. From a distance, this could pass for a fishing boat, but patterns matter more than looks. Trained eyes spot odd fuel lines, odd weight distribution, and subtle wake differences. In the funnel, where narco-traffickers' funnel runs from South America north, those signs stand out against routine traffic. As the RHIBs draw near, tension builds. The sea stays calm, but every second feels heavy. On Gravely, the crew tracks the approach: wind direction, wave height, and any sign of crew on deck. On the small boat, silence hangs thick. No engine revving to flee, No hurried crew movement. It's almost eerie. The leadette team knows this scenario. A vessel that won't run might hide surprises below deck. Large caches of contraband, perhaps weapons, maybe hidden compartments built to deceive. Communication gear crackles. Hails go unanswered again. Protocols kick in, show of force. Gravely maneuvers to a position that blocks a clear escape route without endangering the airships. The goal is to project strength without escalating too fast. At this stage, nonviolent compliance is best. But everyone stays ready. Boarding in open water is risky. A wrong step on either side can turn routine into tragedy. The leadette leader signals the RHIB helmsman. Slow approach, ready to stop the suspect boat if it drifts into a dangerous angle. Body cams roll. Every action is recorded. Sailors exchange quick glances. Training drills have covered this, but reality can surprise. Underneath calm waves, cartel crews often stash massive loads, multi-million-dollar hauls. The financial stakes can push smugglers to desperate measures. But so far, nothing moves on deck. No frantic scurry, no hidden ladder dropping into the sea. Close enough now the team shouts clear commands. Identify yourselves, prepare to be boarded. Still no reply. That silence confirms suspicion. The team secures the boarding lines and steps onto the deck with measured caution, eyes scanning every corner. No crew appears. The boat feels abandoned, yet something must be inside. The team splits. One group heads to the cabin, another checks below decks in the engine room. Every hatch, every panel, every hidden nook is fair game. Below deck, signs of recent activity emerge. Loose panels, fresh paint around seams, modified flooring hinting at secret holds. Drug bales might be packed in cramped spaces, with vents rigged to avoid detection. The team works fast. Find entrances to hidden compartments, tally evidence, and secure anything that qualifies as contraband. Meanwhile, breath hovers in helmets. This could be a ghost ship, but cartel crews sometimes hide out of sight until a chance to fight back. Every shadow, every creak in the hull triggers caution. Back on Gravely, lookouts scan the horizon for potential accomplices. The funnel is busy. Fast boats might lurk nearby. Support helicopters stand ready to join if needed. Escort ships monitor radio traffic in case cartel communications buzz about an intercepted vessel. On board the destroyer, officers weigh every detail: weather, sea state, and possible backup needs. The mission isn't over until all evidence is secured and the scene is safe. This interception shows how patterns beat appearances. A vessel that drifts without an ID in a notorious trafficking zone can't be innocent. Calm seas and a fishing boat look can mask high-stakes smuggling. Here, trained eyes and constant vigilance make the difference between a routine patrol and a major drug seizure. And when Gravely and Leadit 401 act together, that difference can shut down a multi-million-dollar operation before it reaches shore. At this point, the team unearths what lies hidden, and the next steps, processing evidence, detaining suspects if found nearby, transferring seized cargo, begin. But for now, in the quiet aftermath of a tense approach, it's clear. In the funnel, no vessel truly drifts by unnoticed. Trained eyes know the difference. And that's where the LEDET team steps in. LEDET stands for Law Enforcement Detachment, a Coast Guard unit embedded on Navy ships to sniff out smuggling. They know every trick: false hulls, hidden holds, even faked engine trouble to buy time. These aren't shoreside officers. They're maritime hunters, trained to turn any vessel into a crime scene if needed. This boat flagged every alarm immediately. No state flag, no response to hails, no paperwork. The hull looked beaten up, but not from real wear. More like someone tried to fake a rugged look. The route it followed didn't match any known fishing pattern. On Gravely's bridge, warning lights flashed. "We've got a runner," someone said, not because the boat was speeding, but because it fit every profile of a smuggling vessel. Then came the surprise. It dropped anchor and waited. Smugglers rarely surrender unless they can't outrun or outsmart you. What they carried must be serious, and the Navy was about to find out how serious. The RHIBs cut through the water fast, two sleek boats moving like knives on glass. Gravely hovered nearby, silent but watchful. Radios crackled as the lead gave final orders. Steady approach, clear commands, eyes everywhere. Weapons were ready, body cams rolling, every sailor on edge. By the time they reached the suspect vessel, 3 men stood stiff on deck, faces blank but tense. Real fishermen don't freeze when a boarding team shows up. These men seemed to have practiced this moment, yet they looked unprepared. U.S. Coast Guard, prepare to be boarded, no resistance, no sudden moves. The order rang out over loudspeakers. The 3 men exchanged nervous glances, speaking low Spanish among themselves. Silence was their answer. The boarding team climbed aboard with rifles lowered, but not relaxed. Visit, board, search, and seizure, VBSS, kicked in like trained muscle memory. First impressions matter. Motion in hidden spaces, loose items stacked oddly, fresh paint in odd spots. Every detail could hint at hidden compartments. They moved quickly but carefully. The deck felt tight under their boots, as if hiding secrets below. The first thing that caught their eye, the cargo hold sealed with plastic wrap and heavy duct tape. Classic cartel packaging. Under a canvas tarp lay 19 square bundles, each triple wrapped in burlap, tape, then heavy plastic. The scene screamed smuggling. One team member pried open a bundle, off-white bricks stamped with a green S cocaine, and lots of it. That discovery confirmed everything. But for the Ledet team, finding the drugs was only the start. Each brick told a story: routes, cartel symbols, stash methods. The green S marked this shipment as part of a network with its own logo code. Behind that marking, far away on land, money and violence waited. For now, though, the team stayed focused on this boat. Secure evidence, document everything on body cams, and make sure no surprises lurked elsewhere on board. While one group stayed to catalog and bag samples, another circled the engine room and below decks, checking for hidden compartments or booby traps. Smugglers sometimes rig compartments to flood if opened wrong or to burn evidence. The team used specialized tools, handheld scanners to detect irregular hull thickness, small cameras to peer into narrow spaces, and careful taps to find hollow spots in floors and bulkheads. Every echo or shadow could hide thousands of dollars worth of contraband. Back on Gravely, lookouts scan the horizon. The funnel is busy. Speedy pangas or support boats might lurk out of sight, waiting to rescue fleeing smugglers or recover dumped cargo. Helicopters stood ready to scramble, and nearby ships monitored radio chatter for any cartel chatter. On the destroyer's bridge, officers tracked weather data, wave height, and possible backup needs. Safety remained top priority. A sudden storm or equipment failure could turn this operation dangerous in seconds. Meanwhile, on the suspect boat, the 3 men remained on deck under guard. Their faces told of fear and maybe regret, but words were scarce. The boarding team readied questions for when it was safe to talk. Origins of the cargo, planned destination, crew details. But first came evidence gathering, photographs of seals, serial numbers on packing, and GPS logs, if any. Every piece of data would feed into a larger picture of the trafficking network. Finding the cocaine marked a turning point. That load, if delivered, could fund violence and corruption far inland. Here on the open sea, the Ledet team had stopped it cold. Yet handling it was tricky. Too much movement could damage evidence. Too little, and anything missing might raise legal issues later. They bagged samples in tamper-evident containers, labeled each with date, time, location, and witness names. Body cam footage captured every step, ensuring the chain of custody held up in court. With the hold secured, the focus shifted to the vessel itself. Was it owned by the smugglers? Leased? Stolen? Tracing its history could unravel more of the network. Engineers inspected identification plates, engine serial numbers, hull numbers, anything to link the boat to past sightings or theft reports. On Gravely, intelligence officers compared this info with databases, previous seizures, sightings, and known cartel routes. As sunlight shifted across the deck, the LEDET team finished processing the hold. They prepared to move the suspects and evidence onto Gravely or a support vessel. The operation so far showed how patterns beat appearances. A boat with fake wear and odd anchoring behavior stood out against routine traffic. In the funnel, nothing drifts by unnoticed. Trained eyes spotted the signs, and swift action turned a quiet morning into a major drug interception. All that remained was to wrap up this phase, secure the suspects, transfer the cargo, and prepare reports that would help hit the cartel network again and again. Later, back on Gravely, the official weight came in, 860 pounds of pure cocaine. At street value, that's about $13.65 million. The suspects stayed silent. No excuses, no stories. The drugs said everything. The boarding team radioed in the numbers. Evidence was bagged, tagged, photographed, and logged with a strict chain of custody. The 3 men were cuffed, secured for transport, and the boat was impounded. The Navy was already drafting its report. On Gravely's bridge, the mood stayed calm. Not a celebration. This is serious work, not a party. Instead, there was quiet pride. This wasn't luck. It was intel, planning, and boots-on-deck action. Down below, sailors felt a steady satisfaction. Another big shipment stopped. Another crew caught red-handed. Out there somewhere, a cartel boss had to be rethinking plans. U.S. forces were watching too closely. Back on deck, the sun beat down on 19 bales stacked like bricks at a work site. Only this wasn't construction material. Each bale weighed about 45 pounds, wrapped tightly to survive long journeys at sea. No wonder the crew didn't try to flee. Cartels hate wasted shipments, but maybe they figured surrender might earn them better treatment. Either way, when the first bale came aboard, everything shifted. This was more than a bust. It was a message. Each bundle got tagged and logged under LEDET boarding rules. The 3 men, mid-30s, claiming to be fishing, were photographed, recorded, and processed under maritime law. No weapons showed up on deck, but that detail didn't change much. The contraband alone triggered serious federal charges. Their silent faces spoke volumes. This haul would cost them everything. This mission fits a bigger plan: forward interdiction. The idea is simple. Stop big loads at sea before they ever reach land. Every seized shipment is 1 fewer dose on the streets, 1 fewer dollar funding violence, 1 fewer addict in crisis. Navy and Coast Guard crews train for scenarios like this. They share intel, monitor routes, and position ships and planes along known pathways. By striking early, they cut off the flow, forcing cartels to take bigger risks or shift routes under pressure. With bales this clean, no moisture leaks, seals unbroken, it was clear these weren't amateurs. These operatives moved product for a network that expected precise delivery. Instead, they met a U.S. destroyer and a team of agents ready with clipboards, cameras, and sharp eyes. The moment they saw those bales, any hope of bargaining vanished. This was a hard stop. Once drugs were secured and suspects detained, the real grind began. First, chain of custody. Every bale had to be logged with exact weight, markings, and condition, down to the last gram. Evidence must hold up in court. One slip, mislabeling, a missing photo, can unravel a case. Sailors worked under watchful eyes, following checklists, bag samples in tamper-proof containers, labeled with date, time, location, witness names, attached body cam clips. This paperwork might feel endless, but it's what turns a haul into a conviction. The suspects, zip-tied and photographed, moved to holding quarters aboard Gravely. No immediate interrogation. That's not the Navy's job. Their task is safe detention and transport. Legal teams ashore handle questioning and prosecution. For now, the priority is custody and safety, keeping everyone secure until handover. Next up, handover coordination. The Navy liaises with U.S. authorities, the DEA or a regional Coast Guard cutter with legal authority in that area. Often, suspects and contraband transfer at a U.S. territory port, Puerto Rico, or another jurisdiction where federal courts can take over. Plans include escort routes, transfer timing, and ensuring evidence stays sealed. Meanwhile, engineers and intelligence officers check the vessel itself. Hull numbers, engine serials, and ownership records. Was it stolen? Rented under a fake name? Linking the boat to past sightings or thefts can uncover more of the network. The process is tight, procedural, and bulletproof. Every move gets documented, every step logged. That's how the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard close legal loopholes and make sure traffickers don't slip away on technicalities. Most people only see the bust and the bales splashed in headlines, but what turns an interception into a courtroom win is discipline. Gravely's crew showed plenty of it. The takedown might last minutes, but the aftermath is what really hits the cartels. Behind the scenes, there's a checklist for almost everything. From the moment the boarding team steps onto a suspect boat, body cams record every action. Cargo gets photographed from every angle. Bags go into tamper-evident containers, each labeled with date, time, GPS location, and names of witnesses. Logs note weather conditions and sea state, details that rarely matter on screen but can matter in court. Even the order in which bales are lifted from the hold ends up in writing. This isn't overkill. It's the difference between a sealed conviction and a case thrown out because one step wasn't properly recorded. This operation wasn't random. It was part of a long-running push called Campaign Martillo, Spanish for hammer, and that name fits. Launched in 2012, Martillo is a team effort led by the U.S. and joined by over a dozen nations. The goal: crush drug routes across the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific before shipments reach shore. The strategy is simple: hit them hard and hit them early. Smugglers often assume that once they clear South American waters, they're in the clear. Campaign Martillo proves otherwise by patrolling known corridors with ships, planes, and drones, showing that no route is safe if you watch closely. Ships like USS Gravely play a key role. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer may be built for combat, but in these missions it transforms into a floating interdiction unit. Its radar scans hundreds of miles of ocean, picking out small craft amid waves. Data from patrol planes like the P-8 Poseidon feeds in real time, adding infrared views and extra eyes on the water. Yet none of that works without people. The Coast Guard-led teams aboard bring the human edge. They know the tricks smugglers use: false hulls, hidden holds, fake engine trouble. Trained in tight quarter searches, they move fast when the call comes. Detection to boarding can happen in under 30 minutes if conditions allow. On deck, coordination matters. Encrypted communications link the destroyer, patrol plane, nearby ships, and even shore-based command centers. Live satellite feeds share radar tracks and weather updates. Everyone in the chain stays in sync. If the boarding team needs backup, support can scramble helicopters or nearby cutters. At every step, roles are clear. The Navy secures the area. The Coast Guard handles boarding and evidence. Intelligence officers track links to past seizures. Chains of custody start when the instant contraband is spotted and only end when evidence reaches a courtroom-ready storage facility. The bigger picture is this: every ship seized, every ton of drugs removed, chips away at cartel power. When a major haul like Gravely's 860-pound seizure disappears from their supply chain, it forces smugglers to reroute, spend more on security, or risk costlier failures. Over time, these interruptions add up. Campaign Martillo's aim isn't just the one bust, it's the ripple effect, making trafficking riskier and more expensive, shrinking profits and protecting communities from the violence and addiction that follows illegal loads inland. Few see the detailed grind: the hours spent logging evidence in cramped ship offices, the tense checks of hidden compartments, the careful tagging and photographing under sun and salt spray. Yet that work is what stands up when suspects face court. Without airtight records, a big bust can collapse on a technicality. Gravely's crew knows that. Stopping a boat is only half the mission. The other half is making sure the case holds water all the way to prosecution. Each move is supported by secure communications, real-time satellite feeds, and a command chain that acts without delay. Need visual confirmation from 50,000 feet? The MQ-4C Triton delivers live video and radar data straight to analysts. Need infrared scans of a cargo hold? The P-8 Poseidon provides them before boarding starts. Legal authority to board in international waters is part of the mission plan. This operates like a floating command center, linking intel analysts on shore, crews in the air, and federal agencies ready to act when suspects reach port. Cartels depend on speed and confusion. The U.S. Navy counters with systems, training, and zero guesswork. Radar on a destroyer scans hundreds of miles, spotting small vessels among regular traffic. Drones and patrol planes feed constant updates, while encrypted communications keep everyone in sync. When a ghost ship appears without a flag or ID along known smuggling routes, Protocols kick in without hesitation. Detection leads to an immediate risk assessment and boarding plan. Stopping 860 pounds of cocaine goes beyond a headline. That load represents money for weapons, bribes, and turf wars across regions. Every bale removed is one less transaction feeding organized crime and instability. Forward interdiction strikes at the heart of the trafficking network. By interrupting one shipment, the timeline for buyers, dealers, transporters, and corrupt officials collapses. The cartel behind this load loses profit and trust. Partners must question routes and methods, making operations riskier and more expensive. Fewer tons reaching U.S. shores means fewer overdoses, fewer street-level conflicts, and fewer families torn apart by addiction. Communities benefit when drugs are stopped offshore. Intelligence gathered during these missions supports onshore law enforcement in targeting distribution networks and financing channels. Arrests at sea feed evidence for prosecutions ashore. Every maritime intercept becomes part of a larger effort to reduce supply and protect public health and safety. Campaign Martillo underpins these actions. Since 2012, more than a dozen nations have shared intel and coordinated patrols across the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific. Once data identifies a suspect vessel, assets converge. Destroyers handle surveillance and security, Coast Guard teams prepare to board, patrol planes and drones provide eyes above, and allied ships stand by. This networked approach forces traffickers to juggle routes, increasing chances of detection and adding costs. Over time, sustained pressure slows trafficking and reduces violence linked to the trade. On USS Gravely, the process follows strict discipline. From the moment the target is identified, body cams record every move. Boarding teams follow checklists, note weather and sea state, record GPS coordinates, photograph suspicious modifications, and inspect hidden compartments. Each bale is weighed, tagged, photographed, and placed in tamper-evident containers, labeled with date, time, location, and witness names. Logs capture the exact order of removal. That level of detail is essential to avoid legal loopholes and secure convictions. Coordination spans ship, air, and shore. Encrypted comms relay updates, wind and wave conditions, target speed and heading, backup positions, and changes in intel. If conditions deteriorate, plans adjust in real time. Helicopters stand ready to assist if needed. Intelligence officers trace vessel origins by checking hull and engine serials, registration records, and past sightings. Legal teams ashore prepare for the transfer of suspects and evidence to U.S. authorities, often through ports in territories like Puerto Rico. The vessel itself faces secure storage or destruction under legal guidance. Cartel networks feel the impact. Losing a major shipment forces shifts in logistics, testing new routes, and increased security costs. Those changes open fresh opportunities for interdiction. This cumulative pressure raises the risk for traffickers at each step. For each successful interdiction, the balance tilts toward law enforcement. That is the core aim, not a single bust, but sustained disruption of supply chains. For the crew in Ledet 401, this is measured in professional pride rather than celebration. Every step follows training and procedures honed over the years. Stopping a vessel in minutes is only half the mission. Documenting evidence and ensuring a solid chain of custody completes it. When suspects face court, airtight records keep cases intact. That discipline hits cartels where it hurts, undermining operations with reliable convictions. One ship, 19 bales, $13.7 million stopped cold at sea. The USS Gravely and its Coast Guard team didn't just board a boat, they shut down a cartel payday. That precision work rarely makes headlines, but always makes a difference. The sea remains under watch, and traffickers learn that no route is safe when systems, training, and discipline come together. A pirate crew thought they'd hit the jackpot. A massive ship drifting silently through the Gulf of Aden, no lights, no flag, no escorts, just a tempting shadow in the dark. To the cartel-backed pirates, it looked like an easy target, and so they took off after it. What they didn't know was that this wasn't some helpless freighter. It was the last ship they ever wanted to mess with. Behind that massive silhouette was a fully loaded, nuclear-powered U.S. aircraft carrier. And by the time they realized it, they weren't making a getaway, and they were praying for one. What happened next in those dark waters? And how did a normal intercept turn into a nightmare on the high seas? Join us as we find out what happened to the cartel pirates who tried to hit the wrong U.S. Navy ship. They came armed, thinking a cargo ship had fallen into their hands, a big, slow ship ripe for the taking. Armed Somali pirates filled the two skiffs. They cut through the waves at full speed with their engines roaring across the dark waters of the Gulf of Aden. What was their target? A massive silhouette on the horizon. The said silhouette had no flag, no lights. It was just like a gigantic steel container floating quietly. In pirate logic, that usually means unescorted freight, but they couldn't have been more mistaken. It didn't take up to 90 seconds before the silhouette revealed itself before their eyes. They finally saw it for what it really was, and it was not a cargo ship at all. What was before them was a floating war fortress. Not just a U.S. Navy ship, but a full-blown nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. The kind that launches warplanes before breakfast and carries more firepower than some countries combined. The battle line was drawn. The pirates weren't ill-armed at all. They had AKs and RPGs, but the carrier was a different story altogether. There were about 5,000 sailors, Sea Whiz cannons, radar-guided missile systems, and a zero-patience policy for threats. What happened next wasn't even a standoff. There was no fight. The Navy taught the pirates a hard lesson, one that started with a warning and ended with weapons drawn and the pirates face down on a rigid hull inflatable boat, or RHIB. And this is what happens when pirates pick the wrong ship. And not just any ship, but trying to hit a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier was the mistake of the century. The radar picked them first. Two fast-moving blips with low signature and no AIS signal were approaching at top speed. In the Red Sea, that's never a good sign. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, the system lit up in no time. Without hesitation, the operator called out the approaching threat as they were closing in. The officer on the deck didn't need to be told twice. He leaned into comms in the flight deck to launch a Seahawk immediately. Outside the information center, the carrier was already awake. This wasn't a sleepy convoy after all. It was a full strike group on patrol, and the carrier was its nerve center, not something to be messed with. In less than 2 minutes, an MH-60R Seahawk could be seen spinning its rotors as it roared off the deck. Loaded with a door gunner, radar systems, and eyes sharp enough to ID a tattoo at 5,000 feet, it moved with precision, straight toward the incoming threat. Meanwhile, the sailors on the flight deck had paused for exactly 0 seconds. That means they've been up and about. The men in yellow shirts cleared space. Those in red shirts checked weapons load to avoid mistakes, and green shirts waved clearance for another bird on standby. In the CIC, it became clear that the skiffs were splitting. One was pulling apart while the other was still heading straight for the carrier. It was a typical pirate tactic: divide and confuse. But what did the Navy do? There was no panic at all. The captain gave a simple command. He ordered the crew to maintain course and let the pirates do what they wanted. The Seahawk, which was many feet up in the air at this point, had visual of the assault skiffs. The pilot wasted no time in calling in. He notified the crew of the hostile posture and the visible armament. And that was all the Navy needed. Because while most pirate encounters get the benefit of the doubt, this one has not only crossed the line, it has gone deep into the enemy's territory. To make matters worse for the pirates, a second Seahawk was launched. RHIB teams on the nearby destroyer USS Gravely geared up. On deck, Sea Whiz spun quietly into standby. The whole ship was calm, focused, and fast. But if the pirates thought they were waiting to be attacked, then they were grossly mistaken, and they were not waiting to be attacked because on a U.S. aircraft carrier, hesitation is not protocol. Instead, it's a liability. As for the pirates, they had no idea that they were sailing into boiling water. From their own point of view, it was still just a big ship on the water. From the Navy's view, however, it was two threats closing in fast and everything was in motion. The pirates had no idea yet, but the warning shot was already locked and loaded, waiting to be fired. The skiff on the right didn't stop or change its course. It didn't even slow down. It just kept coming in with blind confidence, which was already bordering on stupidity. Having had enough, the Seahawk dropped altitude at 800 yards. Its side gunner swung the M240 into position, but there was no firing yet. The shooter simply took his posture. The posture itself was a not-so-subtle way of telling the pirates that they weren't welcome there. But did the pirates flinch? Number one of them even stood up, and with confidence, he held up something long and metallic over his shoulder. That's right, it was an RPG. And that was the trigger they needed. Hostility had been confirmed. Back on the Eisenhower, the captain didn't so little as to even blink. From the port side of the destroyer, two 11-meter RHIBs landed on the water. The vessels were packed full with Navy visit, armed to the teeth with whatever armor one can think of. These weren't diplomats, in fact. Peace is not in their dictionary. These were literal floating SWAT teams with a license to not only act fast, but to also hit very hard. Maybe the pirates didn't know this, but the carrier itself didn't need to fire a single round. That's what the task force was for. But if things escalated, Sea Whiz turrets were already humming quietly, the radar was tracking the skiff like a hawk staring at a mouse in an open field. If the carrier fires a shot, the battle may be over before it begins. While all this was going on, the pirates moved into flanking position. It was like a losing chess game. Losing indeed, because one skiff was trying to fake out two warships and a helicopter. That's not exactly a winning strategy, if it was a strategy at all. Overhead, the Seahawk's gunner gave a final visual warning. He fired a burst across the water, just in front of the skiff's bow. That was a crystal clear message. It was at this time that the pirates reacted, but it was a bit too late. The RHIB was already on them. They had their engines roaring, cutting across the surf like a scalpel blade. They showed what a real strategy looked like when the first VBSS team boxed in the skiff from starboard and the second team blocked retreat from the rear. They yelled over the loudspeaker, asking them to lay down their weapons and to hands up. Confusion arose. The panic was so great that one pirate tossed his AK into the water. Another froze, and that was a smart choice. But the others had their own plans. The Navy did not waste time, though. In less than 30 seconds, it was over. Weapons were confiscated. The pirates were zip-tied and laid on the deck of the RHIB, with their skiff being towed behind. Security had returned to the sea. But what was Eisenhower doing this whole time? The large carrier never stopped moving. Not even for a second did it slow down a little bit. Because aircraft carriers don't need to handle every threat themselves. They bring an entourage that fights back harder. It was at this point the pirates realized they'd messed up. Not only did they pick the wrong ship, they had the misfortune of picking the wrong ocean as well. They were zip-tied, disarmed, and found themselves staring at deck boots. But the Navy was far from. The thing is, when a move is made on a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier, even a small one, they don't just neutralize the threat. They investigate, document, and send a message. Because it's their belief that tomorrow's threat might have night vision, not just AKs. So while the VBSS teams hauled the suspects aboard the carrier, the second Seahawk flew a perimeter loop. The first Seahawk had done its job, now it was its turn. It was scanning thermal signatures, hull markings, even checking if that skiff had any sort of tech inside. GPS, sat phones, encrypted radio, any hint that this was more than just a bunch of amateurs. And it turned out it wasn't just some slapdash pirate crew. Back on the Eisenhower, the mood was still business. The carrier hadn't even broken formation. It hadn't missed a single step. The catapults were still launching FA-18 Super Hornets into the sky. The deck crew hadn't even batted an eyelid. If anyone was there, aside those involved, they wouldn't even know an intercept had happened unless they looked at the radar logs. And that's the thing about carriers. They don't flinch. They have no reason to. Because while pirates are out here chasing money with leaky motors and RPGs, the U.S. Navy is running a staggering 100,000-ton nuclear-powered fortresses capable of launching jets every 30 seconds and directing regional security across half the globe. But there's a twist here. Remember the second skiff? The one that veered off early? It turns out that one didn't get away either. A drone quickly spotted about 6 nautical miles out, idling near a fishing vessel that looked a little too clean to be hauling tuna. It took only a few minutes for that vessel to be swarmed by a different RHIB team from the USS Mason, another destroyer in the strike group. The result was that 2 more pirates were detained, 1 laptop was seized, and a whole bunch of questions that'll be answered in a classified tent somewhere in Djibouti. What started as a simple intercept had just peeled back a much bigger layer. But the funny part is that the original pirate crew still thought they'd attacked a normal cargo ship. That was right up until a U.S. Marine leaned over and brought them to reality. For anyone still wondering why a carrier is the worst target imaginable, here's what makes it untouchable. Here's how it is. Attacking a U.S. aircraft carrier is like bringing a butter knife to a tank fight. Except in this case, it's not just a tank. It's a floating tank capable of launching fighter jets and has its own zip code. These pirates thought they were chasing an ordinary cargo ship. But when they came face to face with it, what they actually found was the most heavily protected vessel on any ocean. First off, it should be noted that an aircraft carrier is never alone. If a pirate is just pulling up on a flat deck, he's actually pulling up on a carrier strike group, a tight formation of destroyers, cruisers, submarines, supply ships, helicopters, drones, and a sky full of fighter jets. It's basically a floating war city with a zero patience policy. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, for instance, is nuclear-powered, over 1,000 feet long, houses nearly 5,000 personnel, capable of launching fully armed FA-18s every 25 seconds. But that's all there is to the Sea Beast. Below deck, there are multiple hangar bays, maintenance shops, weapon storage, radar control rooms, intelligence centers, and that's not forgetting that it has its own internal police force. Yes, a police force on the sea. There's no inch of the ship that's not being watched, logged, and defended. Then there are weapons. The carrier has close-in weapon systems, also known as the Sea Whiz, which fires 4,500 rounds per minute. It's like a laser-guided meat grinder that doesn't ask permission. Then there's the one known as ESSM, Evolved Sea Sparrow Missiles. Anti-air, anti-missile, anti-whatever. Fast, accurate, and brutal. And one cannot leave out the MH-60R Hawk helicopters, EA-18G Growlers for jamming, or E-2D Hawkeye radar birds that can see farther than most nations even can. With this arsenal, how can one even sneak up on a carrier? If a pirate crew threatens to surprise a carrier, they get flagged, tracked, locked, and lit up before they can even pick up speed. But here's the shocking part. In this encounter, the Navy didn't even use a tenth of what they had. They could have launched drones, fired warning flares, scrambled jets, deployed Marine detachments, or, if it got bad enough, authorized lethal force within seconds. But they didn't need to, because the threat was so far beneath their response capabilities, it was almost laughable. To put it into perspective, a single carrier strike group can control airspace the size of Texas. Yes, the massive city of Texas. That means from hundreds of miles out, they know so much about attackers. They know who they are, where they're going, and what is being carried. If they let anyone get close, it's because they want to see what such a person will do next. And if what is done next looks even slightly hostile, the game ends before it even begins. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower has been instrumental in fencing off attacks over the years. Recently, on 30th of December 2023, Danish container ship Maersk Hangzhou issued a distress call after coming under fire from 4 small ships commanded by Iranian-backed Houthi rebels from Yemen. Attempts were also made to board Maersk Hangzhou by force, while a contracted security team defended the ship. Dwight D. Eisenhower and guided missile destroyer gravely responded to a distress call from the container ship. Verbal commands were radioed to the Houthi ships, while helicopters from Dwight D. Eisenhower were dispatched. After taking small arms fire, U.S. Navy helicopters returned fire, sinking 3 of the 4 Houthi ships. There was no damage to U.S. equipment or personnel. In the process of responding to the distress call, gravely shot down 2 anti-ship ballistic missiles fired from Yemen. On 10 January 2024, the Houthis carried out more missile attacks against U.S. and U.K. ships. All projectiles were shot down by Dwight D. Eisenhower and other ships. On 12, aircraft from Carrier Air Wing 3, embarked on Dwight D. Eisenhower, participated in the 2024 missile strikes in Yemen against Houthi rebels. Tomahawk cruise missiles were fired by the cruiser Philippine Sea, as well as the destroyers Mason and Gravely, and the submarine Florida. So trying to pirate a U.S. carrier is not just reckless, it's literally asking to be tackled by an entire team when you're holding a water gun. And the Navy wasn't even done yet, because neutralizing the threat is only one step. The next step was exploiting every mistake the enemy made. So while the pirates remained in a steel room below deck, zip-tied and silently asking themselves why they did what they did, the Navy's intel teams were already dissecting the entire gear the pirates used. That RPG launcher was taken in and scanned for origin. The laptop. Everything was scanned, and the Navy was able to dig up quite a lot of information, because the Navy doesn't just deal with pirates, they study them. Hard. In the command spaces of the USS Eisenhower, the analysts were combing through everything they could comb through: thermal footage, radio intercepts, power signatures, hull materials. Even the fuel cans got sampled for information. Of all these scratches and scabs, one strange frequency caught their attention. It somehow matched chatter previously intercepted near an illegal arms shipment from Eritrea. And just like that, a seemingly random pirate raid turned out to be part of a network, which meant the follow-up wouldn't be just an after-action report. It would be a real-time targeting package. 12 hours didn't pass before that data was already flying up the chain. CENTCOM, AFRICOM, coalition partners, intelligence fusion centers in Bahrain and Djibouti. The whole machine moved fast, because the next raid might not be with RPGs. Maybe they might come with drones next time, or smuggled man-pads. Or worse, the pirates may be unknowingly acting as bait for a deeper, hidden threat. And that's how the US Navy operates. Every small contact is treated like something to test, a potential distraction, or a prelude to something bigger. So instead of swatting flies, the Navy builds a map of the entire swarm. The pirates were just the beginning. After they were caught, the real work started. Navy teams began digging into the details. Drones flew new paths. Planners quietly said the 3 words that mean a big trouble: target package confirmed. The sea looked calm again, but things had changed. The Navy was watching, and now so was everyone else. By morning, life on the USS Eisenhower was back to normal. Jets took off, people had coffee, and everything ran smoothly. But behind the scenes, a lot was going on. That messy pirate attack had set off a big reaction. Satellites moved. Strange messages were flagged. Even friendly ships nearby were warned. Because this wasn't just a warning to the pirates, it was a message to anyone else thinking about doing the same. A U.S. carrier isn't easy to mess with. At 4 a.m. on July 24, 2025, the USS Harry S. Truman floated silently through the Gulf of California. It looked like any other Navy carrier, but this ship wasn't here for diplomacy. 50 nautical miles east, cartel boats armed with stolen launchers and modified drones rushed over, and their mission? To strike fast, hit hard, and disappear. But it wasn't so easy. They had no idea they were heading into a trap. This time, the Navy wasn't alone. Below deck, something unexpected awaited. So what really happened that morning? And why didn't the cartel see it coming? Join us as we unravel how the United States Marines tricked cartels into a stunning defeat. Mexican cartels have long been a fishbone in the neck of the U.S. military. Although both the Mexican and U.S. government are trying their best to fend off this army of criminals and reach a fair enough compromise for both countries, it appears that the U.S. is on the receiving end of the criminal activities. It's quite hard to imagine that 2 countries separated by a fence could be at loggerheads over jurisdiction for so long, but it's also hard, if not impossible, to overlook the fact that many deaths have been caused by the continuous transportation of drugs from Mexico to the U.S. The tension had been building for months. With land borders fortified by walls and patrols, the cartels pivoted to maritime routes, funneling fentanyl that killed over 82,000 Americans last year alone. Whispers of corruption ran deep, suspicions that Mexican police and military units were turning a blind eye or worse, aiding the syndicates with tips and safe passage. While it cannot be denied that Mexico has tried to solve the cartel puzzle, they have failed in their attempts because, unlike the U.S. that does not negotiate with terrorists, Mexico prefers to employ diplomacy in dealing with the issue, a method that has consistently failed. The Trump administration officially designated 8 Latin American cartels, including 6 from Mexico, as foreign terrorist organizations for their major roles in drug smuggling and human trafficking into the United States. The move marks a major escalation in the administration's efforts to cripple the cartels, as an FTO designation grants the administration access to enhanced counterterrorism authorities, such as the ability to launch covert operations authorized by the president. The FTO designation came only days after the Mexican Senate approved the presence of the U.S. Army's 7th Special Forces Group to conduct joint training with Mexico's elite Naval Marine Corps. During his address to Congress earlier this year, President Donald Trump did not mince words about the threat drug cartels pose. The cartels are waging war on America, and it's time for America to wage war on the cartels. His statement marks the clearest indication so far that the new administration is serious about confronting the cartels and follows a series of escalating actions. As mentioned, the U.S. does not negotiate with terrorists, so when it became unbearable, the U.S. struck, and it struck in an unexpected way. To send a clear message to the cartels that it was done talking, the U.S. positioned one of its most powerful aircraft carriers, the USS Harry S. Truman, just off the Pacific coast. But the cartels, drunk with years of unchecked power and used to the hesitation from Mexican authorities, saw the move as mere bluff. What happened next was completely shocking. Under the cover of a moonless night off the treacherous coast of Mexico, California, on July 24, 2025, hundreds of cartel fighters stormed toward the Pacific coast in a massive fleet of 55 vessels. 40 nimble speedboats armed with AK-47s and rocket-propelled grenades backed by 15 larger gunboats bristling with heavy machine guns. These weren't your average smugglers. They were a cartel armada composed of hundreds of battle-hardened fighters from the Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation syndicates, launching a brazen assault on the U.S. Navy patrol ship they considered bluff. The assault group thought the open sea was still their playground, as usual, a lawless highway for transporting fentanyl into America and causing chaos in the free country. But they couldn't be more wrong. What they didn't know was that a storm was brewing above and below the waves. 50 nautical miles away, the USS Harry S. Truman carrier group floated. Its decks were alive with FA-18 Super Hornets and MQ-9 Reaper drones ready to unleash precision hell on the first enemy to fall within its target range. The carrier wasn't there to show, it was there to remind anyone that challenging America might come at a deadly price. In the dead of night, at precisely 4 a.m., the calm waters off the Mexico-California border transformed drastically into a heavy tension that could be cut with a knife. This part of the sea was a vital strait, a lifeline for global oil trade, where billions in cargo flowed daily through narrow channels linking the Pacific to American ports. The slightest disruption here was capable of spiking fuel prices worldwide, sending ripples through world economies from one end of the world to another. But on this fateful night, the sea didn't serve as a regular trade route. It became a battlefield, one that would determine the fate of cartel lords and put them in their place. The brewing battle was destined to be tough because the assailants were no ragtag bandits. A cartel armada was about to face off against the U.S. million, and the 15 larger gunboats backing them were equipped with heavy machine guns capable of shredding holes from afar. As if they didn't have enough armory already, 20 advanced drones rigged with high explosive payloads hovered above, ready to strike from the skies with devastating accuracy. If you still think they were just simple traffickers, they were mistaken. They were a paramilitary force shifting from clogged land borders to the open sea, exploiting gaps where the border wall vanished into the waves. And facing this onslaught, the United States Navy, but not just the Navy. No one expected the USS Harry S. Truman to be anything more than a floating airbase. A fortress of steel, yes, but mostly planes, not boots on deck. But the cartels made one fatal assumption. The Truman was carrying more than the Navy. She was carrying firepower of a different breed. Marines. The USS Harry S. Truman carrier group stood as the command hub, with its nuclear-powered heart pumping life into a fleet of over 150 sailors and 500 Marines. From its vast decks, FA-18 Super Hornets and electronic warfare growlers waited to launch, providing aerial cover without exposing the carrier to direct fire. There were 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers flanking the scene. Bristling with Tomahawk missiles and close-in weapon systems, they were more than ready to unleash hell from a distance. 4 MQ-9 Reaper drones circled silently overhead, their sensors piercing the darkness to relay real-time intel. When the cartel fleet started closing in with engines roaring like muffled thunder, the Navy braced for a clash that would test both their steel and their resolve. The cartel, with their heavy infantry, somehow believed that they had the upper hand. But little did they know that America's response was already locked and loaded. As the clock struck 4:15 a.m., the two Arleigh Burke-class destroyers flanking the carrier drifted into the distance. It looked like they were fleeing, but they had another assignment in the battle. Minutes later, the still waters erupted into massive chaos. Like a tidal wave of fury, the army of drug traffickers surged forward with all their 55 vessels closing in on the American destroyers at breakneck speed. The smaller speedboats were ahead, and their engines roared as the fighters leveled their rifles and rocket-propelled grenades at the Navy hulls. The attack power was nothing short of terrifying, but that wasn't the real deal. The actual threat came from the 15 larger gunboats, which had their decks alive with heavy machine guns chattering relentlessly as bullets ricocheted off armored plating like angry hornets. The cartel fighters didn't hold back, not that they could even if they wanted to. They directly rammed their boats into the destroyers' flanks, sending shock waves through the water with the impact. If the boats were any smaller, they may have been crushed by the impact. Cartel fighters leaped aboard in a frenzy, engaging the military in hand-to-hand combat. Razor-sharp machetes were swung, and shots were being fired at point-blank range. The fighters, in a rush of adrenaline, shouted in Spanish, their voices mixed with the crack of gunfire as they stormed the decks, with a single aim: to overwhelm the American crew in close quarters. One destroyer rocked violently as a cartel gunboat slammed its bow, allowing a dozen fighters to clamber over the rails. Hand-to-hand clashes broke out, fists and rifle butts flying in the dim glow of deck lights. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood. Engines roaring like muffled thunder amid the pandemonium. But the Navy was ready. Although they were previously prepared for long-range battle, as they didn't expect their assailants to so brazenly climb onto the destroyers, it didn't take long to prepare other weapons, and the Marines were there precisely for that reason. Close-range weapon systems spun to life with a mechanical whine, and they unleashed torrents of depleted uranium rounds that shredded incoming drone swarms. The sleek, explosive-laden cartel drones that were on standby were finally deployed. They dived at Mach speeds, flying toward the ships with their payloads primed for maximum devastation. At this point, things appeared ugly for the Marines. One drone exploded mid-air, raining shrapnel that wounded 3 sailors. Another grazed a destroyer's radar mast, its blast killing one American outright in a flash of fire and debris, sending several spiraling harmlessly into the sea and putting them in an even worse situation. But the comeback was quick. While the melee combat was raging between Marines and cartel members, Navy teams executed pit maneuvers with surgical precision, ramming cartel boats off course and flipping them into the waves. To avoid drowning, the assailants leapt into the air, swinging their arms as they desperately tried to cling to the side of the destroyers. But the Marines wouldn't let that happen. They followed the attack by raining fire from behind bulkheads, their M4 carbines barking in controlled bursts that dropped fighters mid-leap. The cartel vessels that were still standing pressed hard, furthering their own attack. Their drones scored multiple hits that burnt off the paint from the destroyers and dented armor. But the layered defenses held. The fight turned visceral, and as waves crashed against hulls, knives flashed in the air, finding their way into flesh and bodies, tumbling overboard from the impacts. Yet the Marines' discipline shone, even through the smoke and screams. What began as a bold assault by the cartel had turned into a desperate gamble. The American counterstrike was brewing from afar, but they needed time, and so even as the sea boiled with wreckage, the line held, refusing to break. The initial clash had drawn blood, but America's response was as swift as it was unforgiving. While this battle was raging, the USS Harry S. Truman remained safely positioned miles offshore. The boss, who had been quiet the whole time, finally barked orders, commanding that the strike package be launched. Reaper first, Hornets on standby. In a matter of minutes, 4 MQ-9 Reaper drones lifted off, racing to join the fray. These unmanned predators were armed with Hellfire missiles and guided by real-time satellite feeds. They locked onto the cartel fleet stragglers, and with impeccable precision, unleashed strikes that lit the horizon like distant fireworks. The enemy was rendered helpless as the piece of the strike dealt a blow, they didn't see coming. The toll was staggering. 180 cartel fighters lay dead or dying. 40 vessels were reduced to floating wreckage. Their drone swarms scattered like broken toys. But the victory didn't come without a cost. An American soldier, a Marine, fell to a stray rocket-propelled grenade during the melee, while 4 more suffered shrapnel wounds and a destroyer's radar array took minor damage, flickering offline briefly. At this point, the cartel had realized their error. This was no ordinary Navy, it was the Marine Corps. With no choice, the cartel retreated. Unfortunately, as the survivors scrambled ashore, American satellites tracked their every move. Heat signatures betrayed their retreat to a secondary base. The technical team transmitted the location of the second base to an unseen ally and guided them quietly to the precise position. But the cartels had no idea. All they could see was that the American destroyers were closing in on them. They didn't surrender, not that they could. They struck back with vengeance. Hours after the initial strikes, what remained of their armada regrouped. 55 vessels had been reduced to 15, but somehow their confidence remained. In the distance, a mix of battered speedboats and gunboats charged toward the American destroyers in a desperate second wave. This time, they didn't immediately go in for hand-to-hand combat. Fueled by rage and perhaps motivated by fentanyl profits, the fighters opened fire from afar, their heavy machine guns stitching the water with tracers. But just like the previous attack, the real horror came from above. Yes, the drones. The 20 drones had been reduced to the remaining 12, and all 12 of them, with high explosive warheads and swarm intelligence, dove-like kamikaze falcons, their payloads designed to punch through armored decks, were ready to rain hell again. In no time, the sea turned into a maelstrom of close-quarters fury. 2 cartel boats were over-motivated and rammed into the destroyers again. Fighters from both boats swarmed aboard in brutal hand-to-hand assaults. They screamed their mantra as knives flashed and AK-47s blazed in the confined chaos. After realizing their error and knowing there was no turning back, the carelessness of the cartel was visible now. Rather than dominance and strategy, they were filled with desperation. One U.S. destroyer shuddered as a cartel drone slammed into its superstructure, the explosion ripping through the destroyer, spreading a hail of shrapnel that wounded some sailors. One Marine gunner fell when he was unexpectedly struck by a cartel sniper's round, and that was only the second fatality from the U.S. troops. Remember the 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers flanking the carrier? They weren't carrying naval officers. They were carrying the war. Hidden in their steel bellies were U.S. Marines, locked, loaded, and waiting. When their moment came, they surged forward. The destroyer's vertical launch systems flared to life, belching fire as dozens of Tomahawk cruise missiles roared from their cells. They hugged the ocean's surface like hunting wolves, skimming low to avoid detection. Each missile was dialed into cartel gunboats with a sniper's precision, only faster, colder, and far more final. There was a brief silence, but that was only the calm before the storm. Explosions rocked the water as warheads detonated, splintering the hulls of boats and sending fighters tumbling into the churning foam. Meanwhile, under the cover of smoke and the technical coordination from the USS Harry S. Truman, Marine assault forces made their move. 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines hit the shore in a rolling thunder of AAV, 7 amphibious assault vehicles, and LCACs. Naval gunfire kept enemy heads down, while the Marines breached the port perimeter with lethal speed. Makeshift cartel towers, hastily rigged with machine guns, became coffins as Marine sniper teams, ghosts in the brush, took them down before they could even squeeze a trigger. Now the cartel armada were right in the middle of the storm. With the naval destroyers in front and the Marines behind, their attack effected direct hits on multiple vessels, reinforcing the morale of the military. High above, F-35Bs from Marine Fighter Attack Squadron 211, launched from USS America, striking cartel lookout towers and disabling radar systems. FA-18 Super Hornets from Truman screamed into action, their afterburners glowing like angry stars. Diving in coordinated waves, they dropped laser-guided bombs on cartel strongholds along the Mexican coast, identified through urgent intel feeds. Satellite imagery had pinpointed hidden bases. camouflaged warehouses stocked with fentanyl labs and weapon caches deep in cartel territory near Tijuana. One strike obliterated a command center, its subterranean bunker collapsing in a plume of dust and fire, burying dozens under tons of rubble. The deck became a battlefield of blood and brass, with hand-to-hand struggles echoing the raw intensity of pirate boardings from centuries past. Bullets whizzed, bodies collided, and the air reeked of cordite and fear as fighters grappled in the flickering emergency lights. But the Marines and Navy weren't about to despair. Resolve hardened. From the distant USS Harry S. Truman, coordinated drone strikes launched in retaliation. MQ-9 Reapers, armed with classified payloads, targeted cartel hideouts revealed by satellite tracking. One strike obliterated a Mexican coastal base, vaporizing 80 more fighters in a fireball that lit the horizon. To counter the drone swarm, the carrier deployed experimental laser weapons, high-energy beams from directed energy systems that fired the incoming threats mid-flight, their circuits melting in silent bursts of light. A controller reported that the target had been neutralized as the lasers danced across the sky like invisible swords. Just when it seemed all was lost for the cartel, the roar of FA-18 Super Hornets added to their misery. Missiles screamed down from above, tearing into the cartel boats that had almost reached striking range. Explosions lit up the strait as the tide turned in seconds. What had looked like a certain kill became a chaotic retreat. By nightfall, it was over. The drones were gone, turned to ash. The cartel vessels, scattered wrecks floating in silence. Who would have thought that a cartel armada armed with unbelievable firepower could be brought to its knees in less than 24 hours? What began as a brazen and bold assault quickly became a lesson in warfare and dominance. The cartel came, expecting to find a soft target, but found themselves face to face with the might of the Marine Corps. It was a message well sent. The war against Mexico's cartels has entered uncharted waters. Massive smuggling ships vanish beneath the waves, and the battlefield is now the open ocean. But the United States isn't just watching. The U.S. has unleashed a weapon, leading to a mysterious strike that has left several cartel vessels in ruins. Could advanced torpedoes be behind it, or is something far deadlier at play? And just how far is Washington willing to go to dominate this deadly maritime war? Join us as we uncover the Navy's secret arsenal against the cartels. Since early September, U.S. warships and aircraft have been striking fast boats believed to be smuggling drugs along the South American coast. The operations, led under President Donald Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, is one of the most aggressive naval campaigns against cartels in years. Trump, who has often spoken out against the power of cartels in America, believes that these missions are necessary to stop the flow of narcotics before they reach U.S. shores. Both he and Hegseth claim the strikes are lawful under the president's military authority, even without Congress's approval, a move that sparked debate but also strong backing from many in the military community. So far, 10 cartel-linked vessels have been destroyed since the first strike on September 2nd. Each operation has been carried out in international waters, targeting high-speed boats known as narco subs or go-fasts, often packed with cocaine or fentanyl. The most recent mission on October 24 hit a ship tied to Venezuela's feared Tren de Aragua gang, killing 6 suspected traffickers. Most of the action has unfolded across the Caribbean Sea, a major drug corridor connecting South America to the United States. But the campaign has now expanded westward, with 2 confirmed strikes in the Eastern Pacific, an area long used by Colombian cartels to move massive shipments north. The first hit was when U.S. forces, following the president's direct order, targeted a vessel linked to a terrorist-designated group known for drug trafficking. The strike, carried out in international waters, destroyed the boat instantly, killing 2 suspected traffickers on board. A video released by Hegseth showed the dramatic moment, a missile slicing through the sky, hitting a small blue boat racing across the waves before it exploded into flames. Just hours later, Hegseth announced a second operation in the same region. This time, another vessel was struck, leaving 3 more suspected smugglers dead. According to U.S. intelligence, the boat was moving along a known drug route and carrying illegal narcotics bound for Central America. These back-to-back strikes mark the opening of a new front in Trump's maritime war on cartels, one that now stretches from the Caribbean deep into the Pacific. It's a campaign that blurs the line between counter-narcotics and warfare, using precision weapons once aimed at enemy combatants against drug traffickers instead. Supporters call it decisive action against a growing threat. Critics, however, question whether such kinetic strikes on non-state actors in international waters cross legal boundaries. But for the Trump administration, the message is clear. The ocean is no longer a safe haven for the cartels, and the U.S. Navy is ready to hunt wherever the tide takes them. A recent strike has also sparked debate about how the Navy ends high-risk encounters without losing its own. Eyewitness clips and unnamed reports suggested a drone or a helicopter was involved, but people inside the defense world who have seen the footage think a laser-guided Hellfire missile did the job. That weapon hits from a long distance and homes in on a painted target, which explains the clean result. 11 hostile fighters killed and no American losses. That outcome is the goal of every patrol. Stop a threat quickly and bring everyone home. There is a cost for that clarity. In fiscal year 2021, a single Hellfire ran roughly $150,000. That is serious money, but it also buys precision that lowers risk to sailors and Marines. Still, commanders often weigh cost against risk in available alternatives. However, there are 3 different ways a Navy ship might stop a small, fast boat carrying unlawful cargo and dangerous people. These are not instructions, just a look at tools commanders consider when they must act. First, the forward gun. Many destroyers still carry a 5-inch naval gun on the bow. It is a workhorse that can fire at surface boats, support troops ashore, or help defend against aircraft. Its reach can be farther than some guided missiles, and it fires standard shells that are cheaper than high-end missiles. The Navy is also testing a new guided round called a hypervelocity projectile. That round moves much faster and corrects its path in flight, closing the gap between gunfire and guided missiles. It costs more than old shells, but reports put it well below the price of some missiles, as long as it hits quickly. Second, the directed energy option. Navy engineers have been fitting ships with high-power lasers for short-range work. These systems aim a tight beam that can burn through thin structures or set engines on fire. Once installed, a laser uses ship power rather than a fresh missile, which makes each shot far cheaper on paper. The limits are power supply and cooling, but for targets like small boats or unmanned aircraft, the laser is a fast, efficient choice that avoids explosive debris and reduces long-term expenses. Third, put Marines close to the fight. When leaders want decisive results and can accept the risks, they can launch boarding teams from amphibious ships or cutters. Specially trained Marines bring rifles, boarding gear, and the skill to seize a boat, detain suspects, and take control of contraband. This option exposes troops to danger, but keeps engagement tightly controlled and can be the best way to preserve evidence and arrest people rather than destroy everything. Each option carries trade-offs: price, range, chance to recover evidence, and risk to personnel. Missiles buy standoff and speed, but cost more. Guns are reliable and cheaper per round, but may create more chaos in a busy sea lane. Lasers promise low per shot cost once the system is in place, but need robust ship power. Marines offer surgical results and law enforcement value, but put people in harm's way. That delicate balance between cost, control, and consequence took center stage only days later during a high-level meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte on Wednesday, when President Donald Trump addressed the growing controversy over the recent U.S. strikes against suspected drug smugglers at sea. He reportedly claimed that he did not need permission from Congress or any other body to authorize missile strikes in international waters. Under normal circumstances, the U.S. Constitution gives Congress the sole power to approve military action. However, Trump argued that, as Commander-in-Chief, he had the authority to confront what he described as terrorist threats, a label he extended to major drug traffickers. He mentioned that he might consult Congress only if operations were to move from sea to land, hinting that such action could soon happen. He said that when land operations began, he would probably brief Congress, not because he had to, but because he preferred to do so. Trump's words suggested that a land-based strike could be imminent, calling it something very serious and comparable to the current sea missions. So far, all U.S. military attacks under this campaign have targeted vessels in open waters. Yet critics argue that these actions make little sense, as government research shows that most drug trafficking happens overland or through official border crossings, not by sea. Human rights advocates have voiced deeper concerns. They warned that the strikes could violate both U.S. and international law, especially since extrajudicial killings outside combat zones are banned. Simply labeling someone a terrorist, they argued, does not legally justify the use of lethal force. The administration has also not shared evidence proving the individuals on the targeted vessels were guilty of crimes. Recently, 3 United Nations experts released a joint statement condemning the campaign, calling it a breach of the UN Charter. They said that attacking targets in international waters without a valid legal basis violated maritime law and amounted to unlawful killings. They also warned that such actions echoed the long and painful history of foreign interventions in Latin America, something the world should not repeat. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, however, doubled down on the administration's stance. He compared drug cartels to terrorist organizations, saying that they were waging war on America just like Al-Qaeda once did. In his written statement, he said that those involved in the drug trade would find no refuge or forgiveness, only justice. But many experts believe the administration's definition of terrorism has been stretched beyond reason. Brian Finucane, a researcher with the International Crisis Group, criticized the move, arguing that there was a vast difference between international terror networks and drug smugglers. He pointed out that there had been no attacks on U.S. soil like the 9th of November, and no declared armed conflict to justify such military measures. To him and others, the campaign looked less like a fight against terrorism and more like the U.S. government taking the law into its own hands. As the debate deepens, one question remains. Is America's new sea war against cartels a bold act of defense, or a dangerous overreach that could reshape how war powers are used in the modern era? Let's recount all the strikes so far. The U.S. Sea campaign began on September 2nd, when President Donald Trump announced through his social media account that he had ordered a kinetic strike earlier that morning. The target was a small vessel moving through international waters. According to Trump, 11 people on board were killed. He described them as terrorists, though their names, destinations, or cargo details were never released, and no proof of their alleged crimes was provided. Trump declared that the attack should serve as a warning to anyone attempting to smuggle drugs into the United States. He accused the victims of being tied to Venezuela's Tren de Aragua gang, again, without offering evidence. More attacks soon followed. On September 15, another strike hit a vessel in the Caribbean, killing 3 people. 4 days later, on September 19th, a third strike took place, leaving another 3 dead. The campaign showed no sign of slowing down. By October, the operations had become routine. On October 3rd, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announced that a 4th strike had been carried out, killing 4 individuals. Less than 2 weeks later, on October 14th, another attack killed 6 more people. The 6th strike, on October 16th, marked a major shift. The U.S. military reported targeting what it called a submarine believed to be transporting drugs. 2 people were killed in the blast, but 2 others survived. Both survivors were repatriated, one to Ecuador and one to Colombia. Later, Ecuador's government released its citizen, explaining that investigators found no evidence linking him to any crime. Only a day later, on October 17th, another U.S. airstrike hit a separate vessel, killing 3 more. This time, the Trump administration claimed the victims were members of Colombia's National Liberation Army, a long-running rebel faction with ties to drug trafficking. By Tuesday, the campaign had expanded beyond the Caribbean. New reports revealed that the latest airstrikes were conducted near Colombia's Pacific coastline, showing that the conflict had spread across 2 oceans. For U.S. forces, the mission was evolving fast. What started as a single warning strike had turned into a full-blown offensive stretching across the Caribbean and Pacific. But with growing doubts from foreign governments and human rights groups, questions lingered over how far this new kind of war would go, and whether the line between law enforcement and warfare had already been crossed. Now the wave of 9 precision strikes has reignited old hostilities, this time between Washington and 2 powerful voices in South America, Colombia's Gustavo Petro and Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro. At the United Nations, Venezuela's envoy, Samuel Reynaldo Moncada, stood before the Security Council, pleading for the bombings to stop. He warned that the world was watching the edge of an international crime unfold. His words may have echoed through the chamber, but on the water, the U.S. Navy and Venezuelan forces were already circling each other in a tense military buildup stretching across the Caribbean Sea. The clash between Donald Trump and Nicolas Maduro isn't new. It's a rivalry that's been brewing for years. Back in Trump's first term, he unleashed what he called a campaign of maximum pressure on the Venezuelan leader, aiming to weaken his hold on power. The plan didn't end there. When Trump returned to the White House for a second term, he doubled down. This time, he raised the bounty on Maduro's arrest to $50 million, a clear sign that diplomacy had taken a back seat to direct confrontation. Soon after, Trump gave the green light for the CIA to launch secret missions inside Venezuela. Covert operations, intelligence gathering, and special tactics became part of a quiet but dangerous game. While no one in Washington would speak openly about the missions, their presence was felt from Caracas to the Caribbean coast. Maduro, meanwhile, became more than just an adversary. He became a political weapon in Trump's larger agenda. The American president often pointed to the Venezuelan leader as proof of why he needed broader executive powers. When pushing his mass deportation campaign under the old wartime Alien Enemies Act, Trump justified it by naming Maduro as a national security threat. Then came an explosive accusation. Trump and his top advisors claimed that Maduro had orchestrated a secret invasion of the United States through the Venezuelan criminal network known as Tren de Aragua. The group, notorious for smuggling and violence across Latin America, suddenly became a centerpiece of Trump's speeches and campaign rallies. But the story started to unravel. U.S. intelligence reports later painted a different picture. A recently declassified memo from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, released in May, revealed there was no solid proof linking Maduro to the gang's operations. In short, the claims didn't match the evidence. Still, inside the halls of power, the momentum had already shifted. With U.S. bombers flying low over the Caribbean and tensions crackling across the region, one thing was clear. The standoff between Trump and Maduro was far from over. Each move, each strike, and each speech was adding fuel to a fire that could easily spread beyond Venezuela's borders. For now, the world watches and waits as the Caribbean turns into the latest front line of political power, covert warfare, and the age-old struggle for control in the Western Hemisphere. But while ships and strategies clash at sea, another battle is unfolding on land, this time in the political arena. Tensions have flared again between former U.S. President Donald Trump and Colombia's President Gustavo Petro, turning what began as a policy disagreement into a heated war of words. Trump, known for his tough talk on crime and drugs, accused Petro of letting narcotics pour freely out of Colombia, long known as the world's top coca producer. He didn't hold back, calling Petro a thug and warning that the United States might take serious action if things don't change. According to Trump, Petro's leadership has turned Colombia into what he called a death trap. The sharp warning came during one of Trump's public appearances, where he made it clear that his patience was wearing thin. Petro, never one to stay silent, fired back almost immediately on X, the platform once known as Twitter. He threatened to sue Trump in a U.S. court, accusing him of slander and defamation. In his response, Petro declared that he stood firmly against genocide and the use of power for murder in the Caribbean. His words hinted at a deeper anger over how Washington has handled its military actions in Latin America. To him, Trump's statements weren't just political attacks. They were a challenge to Colombia's dignity. Petro, a former guerrilla fighter who rose to the presidency through left-wing politics, has long been one of Trump's most outspoken critics among global leaders. Their clash isn't new. The two have traded blows before over immigration, deportations, and America's long-running war on drugs. What makes this latest confrontation different is how personal it has become. Trump recently told Congress that drug traffickers should be treated as unlawful combatants, a label usually reserved for terrorists. His statement suggests he sees the fight against cartels as a form of warfare, one that could justify aggressive U.S. military action. Petro, on the other hand, has argued that this approach only creates more casualties among innocent civilians. He pointed to the death of a Colombian fisherman named Alejandro Carranza, who he said had no links to drug trafficking. Petro claimed that Carranza was killed during an American bombing raid in Colombian waters, an operation meant to target smuggling routes. His only crime was fishing, Petro wrote online, using the man's story to criticize what he calls the reckless nature of U.S. strikes. That accusation was followed by an even stronger one. Petro accused the U.S. government of murder and of violating Colombia's sovereignty. For him, the issue isn't just about drugs, it's about respect and national pride. What's unfolding between Trump and Petro is more than a political argument. It's a new chapter in the decades-long debate over how far the U.S. should go in its war on drugs, and how much power smaller nations have to push back. Both men see themselves as defenders of their countries, but their versions of justice couldn't be more different. Also, experts on U.S.-Mexico relations have warned that the Trump administration's reported plans for military operations against cartels in Mexico could be seen as an act of aggression with dangerous consequences. They believe it also shows a misunderstanding of how these groups actually operate. Without Mexico's consent, such action would violate international law. While the U.S. might claim self-defense, this right only applies to direct armed attacks, not to crimes by non-state groups like drug cartels. In the dark chessboard of global power, one wrong move can set off a storm. When a Venezuelan spy ship dares to slip into American waters, Washington's patience snaps. This isn't just about oil, borders, or old disputes. It's about testing the U.S. resolve. And America has shown before, from Iran's nuclear bunkers to the Houthis' hidden strongholds, what happens when that line is crossed.
President Trump has been very clear and consistent. He's prepared to use every element of American power to stop drugs from flooding into our country and to bring those responsible.
What unfolded next decides not just Venezuela's fate, but the balance of power in the hemisphere. Lights up on the open sea, a steel tower floats on the horizon, the Liza Destiny, a huge oil platform feeding a modern boom. Men in orange coveralls walk like ants along its decks. The platform belongs to ExxonMobil, a giant American oil firm. On May 1st, 2025, a white hull that should not have been there cuts across the calm. A Venezuelan Coast Guard patrol ship moves into waters Guyana says are its own. The move is not just rude, it is a spark tossed into a long, dangerous argument. Guyana answered fast. Its leaders called the action an incursion.
Move by Venezuela to occupy any space within Essequibo that belongs to Guyana.
They summon diplomats. They move forces and say they would protect their sea and the workers who depend on it. Guyana asked the world to watch and asked for a calm, peaceful fix, even as its military goes on alert. Venezuela pushes back. Caracas says the waters are part of a zone still being argued over. It says its ship had every right to be where it is. The two governments are not just trading words, they are trading claims that reach back a century and that now sit in courts and intense sea lanes. This fight runs on oil and history. Offshore fields near the disputed Essequibo area make the stakes huge. Exxon's floating production unit is not a toy. It means jobs, money, and power, and it makes the map on paper suddenly worth guarding with real ships. Where maps conflict, sailors test the lines. When those sailors sail close to foreign platforms, alarms ring far beyond the deck. Washington watches closely. The United States warns against interference with oil operations and says it stands by Guyana's right to operate in its waters. Then the U.S. moves warships into the area, a visible, blunt signal that the U.S. is not ignoring the matter. 3 Arleigh Burke-class Aegis-guided missile destroyers aren't named for the deployment. USS Gravely, USS Jason Dunham, and USS Sampson. They steam toward the Caribbean and the eastern edge of the South American shelf. The message is simple. The sea is watched. These destroyers are not pretty parade ships. They are tools built to see and strike, to listen under the waves, and to shield whole fleets from danger. At their heart sits the Aegis combat system, a web of radar, computers, and weapons that can spot many threats at once and help the ship pick which to stop first. The radars can pick up targets far beyond the horizon, and the ship's vertical launch cells can send out missiles that hit fast boats, enemy planes, missiles, or even targets on land. They carry guns for close fights, launch torpedoes at submarines, and can put a helicopter in the air to widen their reach. In short, they can watch, warn, and fight in the air, on the surface, and below the waves. The USS Gravely DDG-107 arrives with a hard edge. Built on the Arleigh Burke hull, Gravely looks low and mean in the water. Rows of flat, slanted panels make up its radar face, a cut glass shield for electronic eyes that never sleep. Inside its belly are rows of missile cells, Mark 41 vertical launchers, ready to fire standard anti-air missiles, ESSMs for quicker threats, or long-range Tomahawks for striking inland targets if needed. Gravely can also carry Sikorsky MH-60 helicopters that hover over the sea to sniff out submarines or to drop off boarding teams. Its crew moves with the slow, sure rhythm of people who know every bolt on their ship. The ship's namesake, Vice Admiral Samuel L. Gravely Jr., adds a human story, a man who broke barriers and fought hard for his country. The USS Jason Dunham DDG-109 is next, a ship named for a Marine who gave his life by covering a grenade to save others. That legacy hangs on the hull like a silent promise. Jason Dunham brings the same layered defenses: Aegis radar, a fast-reacting combat system, and vertical launch tubes ready to switch roles in a heartbeat. On its decks, missile launchers share space with a 5-inch gun, and launch rails give the ship options, from warning shots to heavy strikes. For a government that wants to show force without firing a shot, a ship like Jason Dunham is the perfect actor. Large, capable, and easy to spot on a wide blue stage. Then comes the USS Sampson DDG-102, a veteran built to last. Sampson carries the same suite of tools: top-grade radar, surface-to-air missiles, anti-ship missiles, and anti-submarine gear. It can chase a submarine with hull sonar, while its helicopter searches above. If anything breaks through, close-in weapon systems can put down an incoming missile in the ship's last moments of safety. Sampson's past missions show a ship that helps allies, answers distress calls, and moves fast when trouble appears. In calm seas, her silhouette is almost graceful. In tense moments, she is a warning that the United States has more than words in its pocket. What does it mean to send 3 destroyers? It is a careful kind of noise. These ships are smart and broad in reach. They can track aircraft and missiles at long range, spot small boats at sea, and call helicopters and planes into action. They can fire Tomahawk cruise missiles to hit a target hundreds of miles away, or they can swap to anti-air missiles that protect ships and planes nearby. They also carry systems to hunt submarines and to defend themselves from fast, low attacks. That range of tools gives the U.S. many options: watch closely, stop a dangerous move, or, if the rules change, strike back. The presence of these ships is meant to cool things down by showing what might happen if the conflict grows. The sea holds its breath. Far from shore, the blue rolls on. Above that blue, machines hang like ghosts. Below, something moves in the dark. And on the decks of faraway ships, men and women watch every beat. The White House put a lot on this sweep. About 4,000 sailors and Marines are set to watch and wait in the Southern Caribbean. They are not just a number. They are teams with faces, dog-eared charts, and cold coffee. They walk the decks, check radios, clean boots, and learn the names of the planes and boats that would watch the water. Their orders are quiet and sharp. Keep eyes on the sea, gather proof, and be ready. High above the waves, P-8 planes cruise. These are long-winged birds of metal and glass. They fly low enough to see the sea and high enough to avoid cheap trouble. A P-8 moves like a slow shark across the sky. It carries eyes and ears no single man can match. Sensors sweep the water surface. Radios listen for faint talk. Cameras lock on a hull and hold it like a worried parent. The plane can mark a ship, follow it, and pass that mark to ships far below. In plain words, P-8s spy. They watch fuel lines and radio calls. They count people on deck. They make maps of every move. On a clear day, a P-8 looks like a dot. But to the men on the ships, that dot means someone is always watching. They fly patrol after patrol. They trace the Venezuelan patrol ship from dawn to dusk. They move in slow circles above the platform and the stranger ship. They do not roar past. They stay. Their crews take pictures, log times, and whisper into secure lines. One P-8 would point, another would map the route, a third would listen to radio chatter. Down on the water, the warships know they are seen. The Venezuelan captain feels the weight of that gaze too. On the sea, the three destroyers cut through the waves. Behind them, smaller escorts and supply ships move in a steady line. They send signals, call aircraft, and set nets of radio to catch any hint of bad moves. Men on deck smoke or stare at the horizon. They check missile systems. They kept the ship's options open. But the most secret thing in the water is quiet and cold, and maybe scary. An attack submarine slips into the deep like a shadow that has learned to hide. A submarine is the Navy's secret fist. It can sit unseen beneath the waves. It listens. It hunts. If a ship up top makes a reckless move, the sub can be close enough to matter in seconds. The sub can trail a ship without it knowing. It can send warning signs. Or if the order comes, it can strike. Torpedoes and sometimes cruise missiles sit in its belly. Those are not for show. They are for the end of a story, if the story must end in fire. In this watchful net, the sub's job is simple. Find, follow, and be ready. If the Venezuelan ship tries to ram, to board, or to fire on the platform, the sub could surface, call in help, or, in a dire turn, carry out a strike on a clear target. The sub gives leaders quiet power. It makes an option that opponents do not see until it matters. That is why a sub under the waves can calm a fight above them. It whispers that the sea is not safe for violent games. This plan is not a single-day show. It is a long watch. For months, American planes and ships would patrol international airspace in international waters. They would not cross a border or step on a dock without cause. The plan was clear: operate where the law allows, gather the facts, show the flag, and be ready for orders. Men and women on those ships would take turns, sleep under pumps and radar, and log every move. They would keep a steady hand and a calm face. The naval assets are more than cameras and guns. They are a toolkit. They would gather intelligence, yes, photos, radio calls, and tracks, but they could also be a launching pad. If a decision was made in Washington, a hard legal decision, those ships and planes could carry it out. Missiles could be struck from afar. Aircraft would strike from above. Helicopters could drop off small teams. Submarines could launch missiles that fly for miles. That power sits on the decks like a silent promise. It is there if needed. Back in Caracas, the words are loud but not new. President Nicolas Maduro speaks to his people. He says Venezuela will defend our seas, our skies, and our lands. He calls the moves by the United States a sign of a declining empire, something the people can sneer at and rally against. The words are meant to make his mates feel safe. They are meant to show brass and bravado. But words only go so far when metal and glass point across a wide sea. Below the speeches, the Trump administration has another line of thinking. Mr. Trump puts a big focus on cracking down on drug cartels. He says this is part of a wider plan: limit migration, stop drugs, and make the border safer. To do that, the U.S. moves forces into the area for months. Warships are already used to help border security and to chase drug routes. The government calls some gangs terrorist groups. It steps up surveillance in the air over Mexico and the Caribbean to learn how these cartels move men and drugs. In short, this mission ties to old fights and to new ones. That mix of aims, oil, maps, drugs, and politics makes the water around the platform tense. A move means different things to different people. For Guyana, it is about guarding a project that can shape a country's future. For Venezuela, it is about claims and pride. For the United States, it is about keeping a seat at the table and protecting partners. For the men in the sub and on the planes, it is a simple rule: watch well, act only on clear orders, and do no harm that is not needed. Seeing the U.S. closely monitoring the Venezuelan warship, you might remember similar pictures: a big Russian frigate and a low, dark submarine moving into Havana's harbor. The ships passed old stone forts. Cuba greeted them with cannon fire. Diplomats waved. It looked like a show, not a secret trip. The two Russian ships that drew the most eyes were the Admiral Gorshkov frigate and the nuclear-powered submarine Kazan. Both are modern and built to carry heavy weapons. Russia said the ships were there after missile drills in the Atlantic. It said the visit was routine, but the ships were not ordinary. Russia has pushed new missiles into service that worry many military planners. Names like Zircon and Kaliber came up in news reports. Fast missiles that can fly long distances and hit ships or land targets. That fact changed the tone. What might have been a friendly visit looked also like a display of new power. The United States watched closely. U.S. officials said they did not see an immediate threat. At the same time, the U.S. kept sensors on the ships and sent its own vessels and subs into the wider area. Monitoring in this case meant two things: public words saying, "We see this," and quiet actions that made sure Washington really did see everything. The U.S. does not always announce every move, but when big Russian warships came near the Americas, the U.S. made clear it would track them. Why watch so closely? Because modern warships and subs can carry weapons that strike far away. A frigate like the Admiral Gorshkov can launch cruise missiles. A modern nuclear sub like the Kazan can move under the water, unseen, and carry cruise missiles or torpedoes that are hard to stop. When such ships show up close to another country, leaders worry about warning time. They worry about the sudden change in the balance of forces. That is why monitoring is not just curiosity. It is part of keeping a deck of options open. The U.S. used both words and moves to respond to the Russian visit. Officials said they were watching and asked for calm. At the same time, U.S. naval units were active nearby. One U.S. attack submarine was noted to have been close to the region as the Russians arrived. The U.S. kept its watch even while saying it did not expect an attack. That balance, say you are calm while quietly preparing, is how big powers often act when one side wants to show strength. For Russia, the visit did two jobs. First, it showed that Moscow can move big, modern ships to far seas. That sends a message at home and abroad. Russia can still reach places far from its ports. Second, it opened a public stage. People in Havana saw the ships, photos were shared, and the visit made the news worldwide. That public part matters in a world where images shape opinion as much as facts do. For the U.S., wherein the visit was a test of vigilance, the Pentagon's reply was to keep eyes on the sea and keep forces ready to act if needed. Analysts and officials compare this to Cold War-style shows of force. Big moves meant to make an opponent think twice. But the modern answer is layered: tracking radar, spy planes, ships on the surface, and quiet subs below. These tools build a live picture of what Moscow is doing. That picture helps leaders pick the next step without panic. There was also a careful message in the U.S. behavior. By watching, not rushing to clash, the U.S. signaled it would not make a crisis out of every strong move. The U.S. picked a steady watch over sudden action. That approach tries to cool tension by proving two things at once: we see you, and we will not be baited. If the situation got worse, the same sensors and ships that watched would become the tools to act. That is the hard logic of modern naval games. Russia framed the visit differently. Kremlin spokespeople said there was no reason for the U.S. to worry. They called such visits routine and said diplomatic channels should not be ignored. That language aims to lower alarm while still showing the fleet can travel far and carry serious weapons. The choice of words is part of the message. Show power, but deny threat. It is a thin line, meant to keep partners reassured while making rivals think. When the two sides act this way, Russia moving ships near the Americas, the United States watching them closely, the global picture tightens. Other nations notice. The media covers it. Lawmakers ask questions. The moves become not just a local event, but a wider signal about how each country plans to use its navy and its newer missiles. In short, these are not private trips. They are public talks in a loud language: steel, speed, and reach. What comes next is often slow and quiet. Big navies patrol, reports go to officers and ministers, and diplomats trade notes. Both sides want to avoid a sudden clash, yet both hope their signals have weight. Russia shows its long reach and new weapons. The U.S. shows its ability to monitor and its will to respond if needed. At sea, that is the face of modern power. A mix of hard tools and careful words, each meant to shape the other's choices. In the end, watching is a form of power. And if Venezuela does not learn to keep a distance and respect maritime laws, it might have to learn the hard way. Iran can still remember Midnight Hammer. The date was June 22, 2025. The plan read like a page from a thriller. Long-range bombers, stealth fighters, and a silent submarine all moved in the dark to hit 3 Iranian sites: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. 7 B-2 stealth bombers lifted off from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. The planes flew east, far across the globe. They stayed aloft for a very long time. On the way and back, the B-2s were refueled from other planes in midair several times. Reports say they kept in near silence on the radio and moved as one long, careful line toward the target area. Before the B-2s crossed into Iranian airspace, they were accompanied by the newest U.S. fighters. The F-35s and F-22s, quiet, hard to spot, went ahead. Their job, in public accounts, was to draw attention from air defenses, to be the first to see if Iran would fire back. In the end, officials said Iran fired no defenses during the mission. U.S. leaders pointed to recent strikes on Iranian air defenses, by others, as a reason those defenses may not have worked. Whatever the reason, the American strike force met little or no resistance, according to the official lines. At about 2:10 a.m. local time, the B-2s did what they were built for. 6 of them dropped 12 GBU 57AB massive ordnance penetrator bombs on Fordow. Those are very large bunker-busting bombs meant to break through heavy layers of rock or concrete. The 7th B-2 dropped 2 of the same bombs on Natanz. Public descriptions say the bombs were aimed down ventilation shafts and other hard points, so the blast would reach deep into the buried facilities. The intent, as stated by officials, was to damage parts of those sites that support the nuclear effort. While the B-2s were above, a U.S. submarine took part from below. A sub fired about 30 Tomahawk cruise missiles at Natanz and Isfahan. Tomahawks fly long distances and can be launched from under the sea, traveling to hit targets on land. The whole attack, planes dropping big bombs and missiles arriving by sea, unfolded over a short window. U.S. sources placed the strikes in a tight time frame. The public story said the active part of the mission lasted roughly half an hour, with Tomahawks arriving as the last phase. The operation was not only the work of those striking platforms. In total, more than 100 aircraft were involved. Fighters, tankers for refueling, and special planes for surveillance and communications. The mission was put together with many moving parts, the sort of coordination that takes long planning. The B-2's long flights, multiple refuels, and the mix of air and sea weapons show the reach and the complexity of modern strikes. Back in Washington, the Situation Room held leaders and advisors. Photos that circulated showed top officials in a tense, bright room, watching maps and waiting for feed from the field. A decision like this is both military and political. The leaders who authorize such strikes weigh risk and law, and they know the next day's headlines will carry the story around the world. In another region, U.S. and allied forces struck Houthi positions in Yemen. Those operations were described as a response to attacks on shipping and to the Houthis' use of missiles and other weapons that threatened civilian vessels and ports. Accounts list many air raids across Yemen. Strikes hit military sites, but also some places that caused civilian casualties. Local reports told of strikes on a residential area in Sana'a that killed and injured people, and of attacks on a major military area at Sana'a Airport that left smoke and damage. Other hits were reported across Saada, Taiz, Al-Baida, Damar, Haja, and Marib. The public record said the strikes were carried out by carrier-based jets from the USS Harry S. Truman and by Air Force planes and armed drones from regional bases. Those Yemen strikes show the blunt side of power. When leaders decide the risk of inaction is too high, they strike quickly and hard. The cost is human and political. Reports of civilian deaths and damaged infrastructure bring protests, questions in parliaments, and diplomatic notes across the region. That is the heavy trade-off behind any public line about defending shipping or protecting lives. Midnight Hammer and the Yemen strikes share one clear lesson. Modern military power is layered and global. Bombers fly from distant bases and can be refueled aloft to reach far targets. Stealth fighters and other aircraft shape the sky. Submarines and ships add power from the sea. Intelligence and surveillance planes watch, and mobile refuelers keep the fleet moving. The hardware is costly. The decisions around using it are weighty. That leads to the present watch in the Caribbean. The U.S. showed it could move and act beyond nearby waters. The same reach that sent B-2s across the globe and the same mix of air and sea tools used near Yemen is what backs up U.S. patrols near the Venezuelan incident. The aim this time may be to deter, to gather proof, and to keep options ready. Options that leaders say they will use only after long thought and legal checks. And what about a ship like USS Gravely, DDG-107? Gravely is an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. It carries a powerful radar system called Aegis. It has vertical launch cells that can hold many types of missiles. It has a 5-inch gun, torpedoes, and a flight deck for helicopters. It can see far, talk to other ships and planes, and act as a hub for a larger force. That means a ship like Gravely does 3 main things in a tense moment. First, it watches. Its radars and sensors can find and track ships and aircraft. Second, it warns. Its presence alone can push a rival to slow, turn away, or call for talks. Third, it gives leaders choices: to keep watching, to call in other forces, or to carry out a lawful, ordered response. The ship's tools can be used in many ways, and those ways are kept under tight rules and laws that leaders must follow. If Venezuela does not read those signals, the planes overhead, the ships in the lanes, the quiet hum of distant subs and command centers, the country risks a hard lesson. But hard lessons have human costs. They are not a first choice for governments. That is the quiet, uncomfortable truth behind the headlines and the maps.